Welcome to Midday. We begin the show with Peter Milobar, who is joining us, of course, Kamloops North Thompson MLA. Thanks for being here, Peter. We haven't seen you in a while. I know you've been busy.
Yeah, it's always good to come on. Yeah.
We have to talk about a few, or we'd like to talk to you about a few different topics. One of them being, of course, proportional representation. That's sort of the topic of discussion among many people at this point. We know that those ballots have been out in the mail. People have received them and maybe already sent them back. They need to be in Elections BC's hands, like you were mentioning before the segment, on the 30th. So, you know, I think there's a real interest around this, but also a bit of a confusion as well. I just want to start by asking you your thoughts on everything here and sort of what you've been hearing out there among people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think confusion really sums it up. And the first is when the ballot has to be back. So I'm advising and we're advising people, have it in the mail by November 23rd. It has to be physically in the hands of Elections BC by 4:30 on November 30th. And so you never know if there's a slight delay in mail or anything, whether or not your ballot would be received. So we're advising everyone, try to get your ballot in by the 23rd, but the 30th at 4:30 is the official cutoff time. But, you know, it's just been mass confusion for people. You know, and it really, we're just conveying back what we're hearing from people. They're reading the ballot, they're getting confused. They're getting confused by what the three options would mean or not mean. You know, there's up to 24 things that have to be decided for any of those three options after the fact. Last night, we heard the Premier suddenly jump in what was supposed to be a kind of neutral
option.
Well, a neutral committee of the legislature was going to decide some of those 24 items.
Right.
The Premier has come in and said he will be directing some of those decisions. And so, you know, how independent is this really going to be? Why does the Premier not just tell us what he thinks it should be and that's what it's going to be? And that could have been done even before the vote. So really, it really comes down to the process. This has been badly flawed, badly handled, and I think we're hearing that across the province, and that cuts across political lines.
Just back to the Premier, and I know that he has said that one of the options, which would include MLAs chosen from closed party lists, is being taken off the table. So, I mean, some people, like we've mentioned, have already sent their ballots in. I mean, how can you change things halfway through? Well,
exactly. How can you change things? The Premier will say, well, you know, I'm just clarifying what would have been an option and what people were saying they would like to see anyways. That's not the point. The point is the Premier's essentially said yesterday by that statement, if he's willing to override and basically provide a veto to whatever the committee may come up with on that item, what about the other 24 items that he obviously has the ability to walk in and tell his caucus members that are on that committee, this is how it will be? And so I think that's really concerning for people. Remember, it was the Premier that promised a yes or no question. It was the Premier that promised that there would be still regional thresholds in terms of making sure all regions of the province were represented equally. He's walked away from all those promises. Those promises were actually in the confidence and supply agreement with the Green Party. They've walked away from those promises. So frankly, why should anyone believe what the Premier said last night is actually going to stand up 3 weeks from now when the voting closes? And so I think it's really meddling in the middle of people's decision making. It's bad enough we're actually debating. You know, everyone keeps saying that we are going to have a second referendum. Well, that's actually still being debated in the legislature right now. We haven't actually passed that as a law. And not that you can even bind future governments anyways, that's besides the point. But the Attorney General brought that in the middle of the voting period as well as a piece of legislation to be debated. So this whole process has been widely flawed. I would challenge anyone that, you know, if you're a strong NDP or strong Green supporter, put on your hat of criticizing what the BC Liberals do from time to time and ask yourself, if this was a process being run this way by the BC Liberals, would you actually think it was a good process? And I guarantee the answer will be no.
Peter, we only have less than a minute now left, but we've had the Fair Vote representatives on the show. We've talked to you in the past. We've talked to Todd Stone in the past about this proportional representation. Just quickly, do you think that the opposing side, the opposite side, has any good points here? A fair vote, do you think that they have any good points here?
Well, I think they have good intentions. And that's the problem is, though, what they think the system might look like moving forward hasn't been actually spelled out by the government. And as we saw by the Premier, it simply makes him make a decree in the middle of the evening, and suddenly what they think might happen isn't actually what's going to happen. And that's what we've been saying all along. The title of these systems, everyone understands. The operational side of these systems, there is no detail, and they can point to saying, but the government has said it might do this or it should be run this way. But until that all-party committee comes back, which is controlled by the Greens and the NDP, with how the day in, day out operation of any of these systems would work, we just don't know, and they actually don't know. Okay. I know they have the best of intentions and they would like to see that change. We're saying it should have been first past the post versus a system, not 3 systems. Okay. And that system should have had lots of detail, should have had riding maps. People should have the full information of what they're voting for ahead of time, not after the fact. And as we've seen now last night, essentially by a premier that says, give me the vote, and then I will personally tell you how it's going to be, regardless of what that committee's opinion may or may not be.
All right. Thanks, Peter. Appreciate that. Of course, get your mail in your ballot as soon as possible. Deadline November 30th. We're back in 2 minutes. Stay with us.